Welcome to Between Drinks, a podcast where we travel the world one drink at a time. I'm your host, Carol Griffin, a mezcal sommelier, traveling bartender, and an all-around drinks nerd. In each episode, I'll take you somewhere new to dive into a local drink with a story to tell. We'll talk about its history and how it's made, but also its connection to the place and the people that make it what it is. There's a great story behind every great drink, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for listening. The first time I tried Mexican whiskey, I was spending a long weekend in Mérida with a friend. I had lived in Mexico for a few years, but it was still early in my boozy journey. We stumbled into a cute little bottle shop that had the usual agave spirits like tequila and mezcal, but they also had shelves full of other local spirits. Mexican whiskey, gin, rum, and even aperitivos. Mexico is often reduced to just one or two things. Tacos and tequila at best, cartels and violence at worst. But it's so much more than that. And now more than ever, it feels like the time to talk about how much more Mexico is, in the context of my own obsessions and expertise. I'm your host, Carol Griffin. I love drinks of all kinds, and learning the stories behind them even more. But this category, Mexican spirits that aren't made from agave, is one of my all-time favorites. I often refer to this group as más que agave, or more than agave, because as much as I love my agave spirits, and I do love them, let's be clear, Mexico's drinks are more than agave. They are cane and beer and coffee and more types of ancestral corn than I could ever begin to name. And by the end of the season, after learning about some of these drinks, I think you might just hear me when I say, everything is better in Mexico. We're starting the season with Mexican corn whiskey for a few reasons. For one, I fucking love it. For two, whiskey is one of the most well-known spirits. It's been around for ages and has inspired legions of drink nerds to become truly obsessive about their collections. And yet, I meet whiskey nerds all over the world, including in Mexico, who've never heard of, much less tried, Mexican whiskey. And I think that's a damn shame. Mexico is literally the birthplace of corn. You cannot talk about Mexico in any sort of depth, its food, its history, without talking about corn. And so, in my opinion, we can't talk about this category of Mexican spirits without talking about Mexican corn whiskey. Whiskey is one of the best-known spirits the world over. People in the British Isles have been making it for over 1,000 years, which is pretty wild when you think about it. Immigrants from Scotland and Ireland brought it to North America in the 1600s and 1700s, but the raw materials available on this side of the Atlantic were a little different, and so whiskey's ingredients changed too. Scottish and Irish whiskey is usually made from barley, but rye was more abundant in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and so that's primarily what those colonists used to make their whiskey. And then, by the late 1700s, settlers had moved to what we now think of as whiskey or bourbon country in modern-day Kentucky and Tennessee, and they started using local corn. Canada got into the game shortly after that, and then Japan 100 years later, and now there are more than 30 countries with active whiskey production. Yet those 5 countries I mentioned, Ireland, Scotland, the US, Canada, and Japan, they are considered the core categories of whiskey. Everything else is sometimes referred to as world whiskey, which, as a phrase, it's kind of like the term world music, and that it feels like we're othering anything that's not very focused on the mostly white Western world, but I digress. Now that we've talked about the broad strokes of whiskey's history, let's go back to those settlers in the US who first started making corn whiskey in the late 18th century. Because that's where corn whiskey, and bourbon specifically, really started. Whiskey is a distilled alcoholic spirit made from grain. The category is broad, and the legal definitions vary country to country, but at a high level, it's all made the same way. Producers select grains like wheat, barley, rye, or corn. They mash, ferment, and distill those grains, and then they age the resulting liquid in barrels that give it color and flavor. The exact grains and types of barrels often vary, and there are an infinite number of micro decisions involved along the way that can affect the final result. This is really what makes distilling both a science and an art, in my opinion. Bourbon is a type of whiskey with a few extra requirements. The main ones are that, 1, the grain bill, which is what we call a particular whiskey's exact recipe, has to be at least 51% corn. The rest can be barley, rye, and insert other cereal grain here, but it's got to be 51% corn. 2, the liquid has to be aged in new charred oak barrels. No other type of wood, no reusing the barrels when you're done, just got to be in a new oak barrel. And then 3, it has to be made in the US. For our purposes, talking about Mexican corn whiskey, that last bit is the important part. You could use the same mash bill, the same production process, The same everything, but if you're in Kentucky or even California, you can call it bourbon. If you're outside of the US, you have to call it corn whiskey or just whiskey. Corn whiskey isn't super common outside of the US, but countries like Mexico, Japan, and India are fucking around and finding out, and I love to see it. As someone who loves bourbon, I find Mexican corn whiskey particularly interesting, not only because of Mexico's long history with corn, but also because of how much more corn forward it is. Like I said, bourbon is typically made with 51% corn, and that corn is typically genetically modified and engineered specifically for bourbon. Mexican corn whiskey, on the other hand, is often 100% corn, or close to it, and it's made with heirloom varieties of corn that are packed with flavor. Mexico is the birthplace of corn. Full stop, no competition. The earliest evidence of domesticated corn was found in southern Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, where it can be traced back 6,000 years. 6,000 years! And I thought it was hard to wrap my brain around 1,000 years of whiskey making. Now, when I say corn, I'm not talking about the standard yellow, only somewhat flavorful, so let's just add butter variety of corn that most of us eat. Native corn was, and still is, packed with flavor, found in every color of the rainbow, and has way more nutrients. So why are we eating the please add butter variety? Well, I'm sure you can guess. It's those dollar bills, y'all. Genetically modified corn, or GMO corn, comes with higher yields, and so you can make a lot more money growing it. The trade-off is that the native corn still found in Mexico is now at risk of extinction. As recently as March of 2025, Mexico's president issued a constitutional amendment banning GMO corn from being planted in the country. The goal was to protect these 60-something native varieties that still exist in Mexico, and by extension, protect its cultural heritage, food sovereignty, and public health. But GMO corn can still be imported, and so cross-contamination, and thus extinction, is still a big risk. Enter some enterprising mezcaleros at stage left.
They had a love of corn, so Jaime said, if we make the best tortillas in the world, the best tamales, why don't make the best whiskey?
That was Juan Miguel Anaya from Juan del Campo, one of my favorite whiskey brands. It's made in central Mexico, right outside the city of Querétaro, and just a few hours from my home in Mexico City. I love Juan del Campo because their whiskey is fucking good, first and foremost, but also because it's produced ethically in small batches, often using a single variety of native corn, or maíz criollo, as they call it. This is really unique because most whiskey is made by blending different grains together. That's how whiskey is made all over the world, so it's totally normal to do that. And yet, I think it's really cool to try a whiskey that showcases a specific type of corn, especially when it's as special as the corn being used in these whiskeys. This is an element that's unique to Mexican whiskey specifically. So if you take away one thing, that's the thing to remember about what makes it different from other whiskeys. The corn is special, and they're using way more of it than other whiskey producers. The flavor is less a product of the barrel and more about showcasing that corn. Don't believe me? Try Juan del Campo's Black Pozole whiskey and thank me later.
They are unique products that probably, if you don't taste it right now, like a red whiskey, red corn from Chiapas, it's probably gonna be extincted, and you're never gonna have another bottle of that.
Yeah, you're never gonna try that corn again unless, you're at a fancy farm-to-table restaurant, maybe.
Exactly.
I got to visit Juan del Campo's distillery earlier this year, and the thing that stuck with me is that the whole company is like one big milpa. It's grown organically from mezcal to whiskey and even onto wine and gin, the story of which I'm going to save for a future episode. Their mezcal, which is sold under the name Gracias a Dios, or Thank God, is made by Oscar Hernandez, a fourth-generation mezcalero, who is not only the one making the mezcal, but is also an equal partner in the brand, which is unfortunately not common. Hernandez grows the agave for his mezcal alongside corn and beans. This supports a healthy ecosystem and provides foodstuffs for his family and local community. It was also the inspiration for Juan del Campo's whiskey. Because, in their minds, if you're already growing great corn, why not see if you can also make a great whiskey? These days, the company sources corn from a number of different farmers all across the country who each provide unique varieties of maíz criollo. These farmers are made financial partners in the business, just like Hernandez, and they have their name and photo included on the bottle, along with a slew of other interesting details that give you the full picture of what's inside.
funny.
I love that you put that on the bottle.
It's a recognition for the people that works the land, and they became when they give us the corn, they become partners.
Okay.
So they receive profit from the corn. So,
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So you were not just like, give me the corn, like you're gonna be our partner. So when you're drinking Macallan, you only see shit. Like you putting a face to what you're gonna drink, where it came from, what it means, how it's made.
In many ways, Juan del Campo's story is the perfect example of why whiskey production makes so much sense in Mexico, and why I think it's really surprising that it's such a new category. Despite 6,000 years of corn cultivation and 3,000 years of mezcal production, no one really connected the two until 2013. There were some whiskey distillers along the border during U.S. Prohibition, but that's kind of it as far as I can find. And this feels wild to me, especially when you consider that indigenous communities across Mexico have been fermenting corn for drinks for like 1,000 years. They were already doing the mashing, the fermenting. They just weren't doing the distilling. They left that to the mezcaleros until 20 years ago. There are still fewer than a dozen whiskey brands that are commercially available. And even then, production is small, distribution is not widespread, especially outside of Mexico. Most of the producers do have some mezcal connections. A lot of them started in mezcal, either as mezcaleros making their own spirit or in and around the production and sale of it. And while they're all fans of whiskey, and their whiskey in particular, obviously, the thing that struck me the most during my interviews and research is that their businesses are all about more than making whiskey. They're about sharing these native corn varieties before they go extinct, giving people a chance to try it outside of a fancy restaurant, and celebrating Mexico's connection to this incredible foodstuff. This is a theme that will run through the whole season, and one that I hope shows you a different side of Mexico, a country that I love, that I now get to call home. So now that I've sold you on Mexican whiskey, let's talk about where you can actually buy it. This category is so new that when doing some initial research for this episode, ChatGPT served me so many wrong answers that I eventually gave up and went on to do everything the old-fashioned way. Googling my little heart out, going to all my favorite bottle shops in Mexico City, and sending DMs to every bartender and industry friend that I have. Lucky for you, I did that legwork, and I put together a big old guide to Mexican whiskey that you can find on my website, betweendrinks.co/Mexican whiskey. On that landing page, I list all the producers who have a commercially available product. A lot of them are still hard to find, but this is thankfully changing. Abasolo, another one of my favorite whiskeys from Mexico, is arguably the biggest of the bunch. Their distillery, the first in the country to be built specifically for whiskey production, is found not far from Mexico City. They make a single style that's paving the way for the category abroad, which is usually what it takes. One big focused player that educates the consumer that this category of Mexican whiskey even exists and opens the doors for everyone as a result. I'm always so thrilled when I see a bottle of Abasolo behind the bar outside Mexico. And I've converted so many whiskey lovers in the US and Europe by making them try it neat or in an old-fashioned. So I encourage you to try the same. Abasolo is currently available in the US, UK, Denmark, and Australia. So if you live in one of those places, be sure to pick up a bottle. Or try having a traveling friend grab it for you if you don't. I've been known to do that a few times. Another brand that's becoming easier to find is Sierra Norte, which is made in Oaxaca, that part of Mexico that I mentioned earlier that was the birthplace of corn. They're another producer that makes whiskey from single varieties of native red, white, yellow, and even rainbow corn in Oaxaca specifically. So if you're a whiskey nerd like me, I highly recommend trying all their bottles side by side for a great example of how much impact these different corn varietals can have on the final flavor. And hey, no matter where you live, it never hurts to ask at your local liquor store. The more interest in this category, the better, and who knows, maybe they can order you a bottle. Well, that's all for this episode, y'all. I did a lot of research on whiskey, corn whiskey, and Mexico in general for this episode, so check out that link I mentioned for some more fun facts and outtakes of sorts. That's betweendrinks.co/Mexican whiskey. If you're new to Between Drinks, I also want to share my newsletter where I write about the overlap between travel, culture, and drinks. It's basically a mini version of this podcast, and it's where I share a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that goes into these episodes. Trips to distilleries, off-topic but interesting conversations with brewers and bartenders, and specific recommendations on where to get great drinks in cities around the world. You can subscribe at betweendrinks.co/subscribe. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you for the next episode as we dive further into other Mexican spirits.